Greetings, viewers. JLB, after a very long hiatus, due to the fact that there's some new thing going on YouTube in which you have to determine whether your content is child-friendly or not, I'm back with a brand new video about the most mischievous cartoon trio this side of Mississippi. But then again, I don't live in Mississippi, so what the hey? And no, I'm not going to be talking about the Animaniacs, though they will be featured later. I'm talking about Alvin, Simon, and Theodore, the Chipmunks. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, the Chipmunks first originally appeared in a little show called The Alvin Show. It was a simple animated syndicated program that ran from October of 1961 to September of 62. And of course, it was the debut of, like I mentioned, the stars of the show, the Chipmunks. They aired for only one season in primetime, and they were originally sponsored by General Foods. For example, for some of you who grew up back in the 60s, you probably remember seeing a bunch of Jell-O or Post-cereal commercials featuring the Chipmunks. Well, this show is pretty much where it came from. But the series was born out of the momentum of the Chipmunks creator Ross Bagdasarian Sr. and his original hit music gimmick, which developed into the Chipmunks that we know from the past. A trio of rambunctious kids, particularly the namesake star of the show, Alvin Seville, whose mischief contrasted to his tall, brainy brother Simon and his short, chubby brother Theodore, as well as their long-suffering and perpetually put-upon manager/father figure, David Seville. Now, I could go pretty much all day talking about the history and the rise of popularity for the Chipmunks, but we'll see the rise of the Chipmunks as we go on through the years. But basically, aside from the main group, the main four, the Chipmunks, Alvin, Simon, Theodore, and their father David, or Dave, my mistake, there was also a 7-minute segment in between Chipmunk shorts called Clyde Crash Cup, in which David Seville was portrayed as a hapless bachelor who managed and mentored the 3 singing rodents. But that was for the Chipmunk series, the series of shorts that is. But the segment I'm going to talk about here was about a character by the name of Clyde Crash Cup, who was voiced by Shepard Menken, who was impersonating Richard Hayden's Edwin Carp. Now, Clyde was a scientist/inventor, and each segment was introduced by Alvin, who was told by Dave that he was introducing a great inventor, and was ultimately dumbfounded when he heard that it was Clyde Crash Cup. Of course, Alvin was never really a fan of him, as during the show intro montage, he gave him a cold and rather not very supportive look. Now, Clyde's inventions were really items that had already been created, but with his own personal touches. And his creations often backfired on him until his silent, level-headed assistant Leonardo, who was diminutive, balding, and perpetually whispering in Clyde Crash Cup's ears, saved him from any further self-destruction. Now, the series ran syndication on CBS on Saturday morning. Well, originally it aired on CBS in the Saturday morning time slot for a few years after the primetime run ended, and segments from the show were syndicated in the mid to late 60s under the package The Alvin and the Chipmunks. Or Alvin and the Chipmunks, my mistake. The first syndicated package consisted of individual show segments only, including Alvin and Clyde, and the Chipmunks musical segments, not in the form of half-hour shows. The series was later revived on NBC, and again promoted under the title Alvin and the Chipmunks, with the introductory Alvin Show title card being cut off from the beginning of the show opening. Saturday mornings between March 10th of '79 and September 1st of that year, Superstation WGN Chicago 9, or WGN WGN-TV for all you folks in the Chicago area, began airing the show in September of '83, replacing the Pink Panther show, lasting until mid-'85, and another superstation, WTBS Atlanta, or simply known as, or as we know it today as TBS, picked up the show in 1986. Ultimately, series creator Roz Bagdasarian Sr. died of a heart attack on January 16, '72. Years later, his son, Ross Jr., picked up his joke and produced the album Chipmunk Punk in 1980. The success of that spurred a renewed interest in the Chipmunks, and it launched in fall of '83 on NBC and was entitled simply as Alvin and the Chipmunks, with Ross Jr. taking over the role of David Seville. Now, Ross's wife, Janice Carmen, played the voice of Theodore, as well as the genderal opposites of the Chipmunks, the Chipettes. Brittany, Jeanette, and who was the other one? Anyway, his wife ended up playing the roles of the Chipettes. Like I said, they were the Chipmunks' female counterparts. To coincide with the new series, Viacom Enterprises distributed reruns of The Alvin Show to local stations, so that way kids of the modern era could get caught up to speed on Alvin and the Chipmunks and their popularity. Ultimately, in 1981, Clyde Crashcub made an appearance during a dream sequence in the very first Alvin and Chipmunks short or special that I saw when I was growing up, A Chipmunk Christmas. During recent network airings of the special, the sequence was ultimately cut out due to network time constraints concerning commercial ad time. In 1990, the Alvin Show versions of the Chipmunks and Clyde Crashcub reappeared in an episode of The Chipmunks Go to the Movies entitled Back to Our Future, which was a spoof of the 1985 classic Back to the Future. Now, a majority of the songs and clips from The Alvin Show are featured in the Alvin and Chipmunks Sing-Along Songs VHS releases that were released in the mid-90s. The songs, however, were slightly remastered, and I just happen to have a copy of one of those tapes. Now, Nickelodeon picked up U.S. broadcasting rights to The Alvin Show sometime in 1994. Nickelodeon aired digitally restored versions of each episode as it originally was broadcast, save for the commercial plugs and Alvin's addition of his name to the closing, adding to its logo to the opening. The show aired on weekday mornings for approximately 1 year until the Chipmunks left Nickelodeon in 1995. During this time, as well as for some time after the full episode stopped airing, the individual Chipmunk and Clyde Crashcub cartoons and musical segments were inserted into episodes of the Nickelodeon program Wienerville, for those of you who grew up watching that show. Ultimately, in 1996, not 1995, 96, my mistake for earlier. In 1996, Nickelodeon stopped showing Alvin Show segments altogether, and no television station has aired them since. But in all seriousness, after all these years, are the Chipmunks of the old worth revisiting? The obvious answer? Of course. Those of you who are 80s kids or 90s kids, or millennials like me, late 90s/millennials I should say, you might be a bit familiar with the Chipmunks through some of the VHS only movies or the live action movies. But in all honesty, I think the classic Chipmunks is definitely a piece of animation history that should always be remembered for all time, no matter how old you get. You always have to find time to watch one generation or another generation of those three mischievous chipmunks. And with that being said, that wraps up another episode. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for another episode. Until then, stay animated.